Illuminati Unmasked by Johnny Cerrucci. Chapter 9. The Clinton Years, when the false flags was perfected. Here now is Johnny Cerrucci.
Wikipedia states, false flag or a black flag describes covert military or paramilitary operations designed to deceive in such a way that the operations appear as though they are being carried out by entities, groups, or nations other than those who actually planned and executed them. Operations carried out during peacetime by civilian organizations as well as covert government agencies may, by extension, be called false flag operations if they seek to hide the real organization behind an operation. Geraint Hughes uses the term to refer to those acts carried out by military or security force personnel, which are then blamed on terrorists. In 64 AD, Rome suffered a terrible fire that burned for nearly a week and destroyed 75% of the city. Citizens suspected that Emperor Nero had started it, but instead he scapegoated the troublesome and burgeoning population of New Christians. At the turn of the century, Cuba was an allure to American business for trade in sugar and iron. The elite were eager to rid the hemisphere of Spanish influence, and the sinking of the USS Maine and loss of her 266 sailors was the catalyst for war. However, controversy swirls around the grave of the warship to this day, and the original government explanation of a Spanish mine no longer holds water. In May of 1915, a German U-boat sank the ocean liner RMS Lusitania, and she lost an astounding 1,195 passengers to the icy waters of the Atlantic. It was an outrage that was called to mind repeatedly by politicians and media alike until America joined World War I less than 2 years later. What was discovered well afterward was that it was the American and British governments that put those passengers at risk by loading the Lusitania with arms for the war. In 1932, Germany's political landscape was strewn with schisms caused by competing parties and interests. In January the following year, German President Paul von Hindenburg appointed the powerful Nazi Party's Adolf Hitler as chancellor. Hitler was extremely ambitious, but had learned from his failed strong-arm coup of a decade earlier. Less than 2 months after becoming chancellor, Germany's building of parliament, the Reichstag, burned to the ground. German communists were blamed, and the Führer was a wave of emotion that Hitler rode into becoming Führer. Few now dispute that Nazis started the blaze. Success breeds success, and 6 years later, Der Führer had his eyes on Poland. In late August of 1939, the German secret police, the Gestapo, located an isolated radio outpost along the Silesian border near the town of Gleiwitz. The 3 operators were subdued by Poles, and the radio station was taken over and began broadcasting a message of Polish resistance that likely no one heard because it was only a relay station. Later, a Polish sympathizer was dragged by the Gestapo in a drugged state to the location, where he was executed as proof of the aggression. A few days later after that, in September, Germany invaded Poland. Remember the Maine. In 1962, members of the United States military recommended to President John F. Kennedy that innocent Americans be murdered, and communist Cubans could be blamed as provocation for war with Cuba. In the most perverse sense of irony, Operation Northwoods even offered to blow up a U.S. warship in Guantanamo Bay, creating a new take on Spanish philosopher Jorge Santayana's famous phrase, "Those who are oblivious to history are doomed to repeat it." Some have pondered whether Kennedy's refusal contributed to his assassination. In 1964, American aid to South Vietnam was only in the form of advisors and special operations units. After a series of attacks on the Navy destroyer USS Maddox in the Gulf of Tonkin, Congress gave Lyndon Johnson carte blanche to send tens of thousands of young men to be maimed and killed for a massive new military-industrial complex.
Added to this, 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. We annually spend on military security alone more than the net income of all United States corporations. Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes.
Later it was found no such attacks ever occurred. Pause. Since writing this, my suspicious connections to the Navy commander in the Tonkin Gulf at the time, Admiral George Morrison, the father of Doors lead singer Jim Morrison. And here I can recommend Dave McGowan's work on how the government and the CIA was involved in almost all of the top bands of the drug era in the 60s. Now, Dave will never give you the tie-in to Rome, which is the critical big picture that I give you, but it's some great work on that piece of the puzzle. In 1967, Johnson would again be implicated in the Israeli attack on the USS Liberty.